Oh, howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Welcome to the 2021 Halloween special. Now, you might be wondering what this abomination is. And I will simply say, no one ever said that a Mosin can't dress up for Halloween. So that's what we have here. Specifically, this is a St. Petersburg cavalry carbine produced by the Ijevsk factory in 1916. This rifle was most certainly used during World War I by the Russian army. Has a lot more clandestine history after that though, and we'll get into that a little bit here today. Now, as you can see here, before we get into sort of the boring details that'll put a lot of people to sleep, we're going to have some fun. We're going to blow up some pumpkins with this. Now, we're at pretty close range, so to even out the odds a little bit, I picked a gun that doesn't have a front sight. But that shouldn't be a problem, because what I found out, historically speaking, is that the only thing a front sight really does is obscure your target. So we don't really need that. Now, this is what we call an Obrez stock. An Obrez was a gun developed during World War I in the trenches. It was basically a Mosin Nagant with the stock cut off and the barrel cut off. This gun is not an Obrez though. Here in America, that's technically illegal. You need a tax stamp, and you got to go through a bunch of paperwork to cut off the barrel under 16 inches. So that's not what this is. This is actually the standard length for the barrel length for a St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. All right, and we'll get into that more here after we blow up some pumpkins. But what I'm actually calling this, instead of an Obrez, is a mare's leg. Now, maybe that's not a term you're familiar with. Here in America, the mare's leg was actually developed kind of encircling the whole cowboy era, specific to the lever action rifle with, a really short barrel. Sometimes it was shortened or cut down, but a short barrel, kind of like we have here, a short barrel, and a really short stock, just like this. One of the TV shows it was made famous in was a really old one called Wanted, Dead or Alive, featuring none other than Steve McQueen, who is a pretty cool character. So I'm calling this a Mosin mare's leg. Now, a Mosin mare's leg poses a really interesting question. And we're not really going to fully test it in this video, because in order to fully test whether or not the Russian forces, or whoever else captured M91 Mosin Nagants in World War I, actually used mare's leg Mosins in a configuration like this, we need one with a front sight. So, in another video for another day, we'll be testing out the theory of, does a Mosin mare's leg actually work with a 1907 carbine? Which is interesting, because that's the gun that's the Mosin Nagant that's most similar to the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. So, now that you've bared with me through that whole spiel, we're going to go ahead and try to hit some pumpkins without a front sight. Then we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at this gun. And then we're actually going to compare one of these side by side to a 1907 carbine to see what are some of the similarities and some of the differences, and a few misconceptions. So let's get into it. Alright, so I got my ears on, and I got 5 rounds loaded. Now, I've checked the rifling on this gun, and it's probably one of the most worn examples of rifling I've ever seen on a firearm. But who cares? We're not going to really need good rifling to hit these. Or a front sight, probably. It does headspace quite well though, so it should work. I've never shot it in this configuration. Now, some of you out there might be asking, does it have recoil? Well, let's find out, shall we? All right, let's see if we can hit this first pumpkin. Fire in the hole, baby. Oh, baby. Look at that. See, who said you need a front sight? I don't know. Let's take a closer look at that. Well, it went straight through. Let's try to hit it again. Oh, baby. It's got a bit of a kick to it. It actually quite hurts the wrist right here. That's where all the recoil's going. Not super pleasant to shoot. 5 rounds, and she is smoking, folks. Let's take a closer look at the damage. All right. Well, as you can see, we've made a big crater in the ground. Now, for those of you that want to see this explode, the best way to get one of these to explode is to get something like a big shotgun. Now, as we can see here, the bullets didn't really get a chance to expand, which makes sense because they're full metal jacket rounds. So we had a pretty good grouping, I have to say, for no front sight. I wasn't actually expecting that. So that's pretty cool. And you know, I would maybe try to eat that if I actually liked the taste of pumpkins, but that's okay. Let's look here on the back. Oh, baby. That is some damage. You can see there we got some nasty looking pumpkin seeds and some other things in there. And I mean, that's quite an impressive crater we've created. So it turns out, if you want to carve some pumpkins this year, all you need to do is get a St. Petersburg cavalry carbine, put it in an Obrez stock, and remove the front sight. How about that? Well, let's see what else we can hit. All right, I got another 5 rounds loaded here. What I noticed looking back on the video footage, this thing really spits fire. This is just not really that pleasant to be around. I kind of like it. All right, let's see if we can go for that far one there, that farthest one. Think Big Sam can hit that with no front sight? Let's find out. Now, as you can see, this one takes a little bit of coaxing to get the extractor over the rim of the case. So sometimes you just have to do that. All right, fire in the hole. Oh, baby. We hit something. All right. I saw some pieces fly. That was not good. That might have hit high. Oh, baby. I think I'm hitting off to the side, but we're doing some damage. I'm interested to see the damage that we did to this guy. Last shot. Oh, baby. That piece flew 20 feet in the air. All right. And she is smoking again. We're smoking some pumpkins today, folks. All righty. Well, let's go check out the damage on this one. All right. There's our first one right there. We've looked at that. Oh boy. So it looks like we had one that kind of grazed the top here. And then, I love the smell of pumpkins in late October. I tell you what. But look at the damage here. This, oh baby. You know, this reminds me a lot of the cheese graters at Taco Bell. Kind of looks the same. This is actually shredded cheese. If that's not shredded cheese, I don't know what is. But something very bad has happened to this pumpkin's day. Let's look at some of the other pieces. There's one there. And then there was the one, that was the one I think that flew like 20 feet in the air. Oh yeah, that was a chunk of the outer skin. Look at that. Huh. Man alive. The things I do for y'all. What's great here is I don't know how that happened. Because we were shooting it at this angle. Maybe a ricochet, I don't know. Well, that's good. Let's fire off a few more rounds. All right, let's try to finish off that last one. He's been mortally wounded in combat, so we're gonna give him an honorable end. Well, as honorable as it can be with an abomination like this, right? Fire in the hole! Oh, baby! Whoa, baby! Whoa! That's what I'm talking about. Whoa, mama! All right, let's check out the damage and then we'll wrap up the shooting section in this video. I'd say we did a lot of good work today, folks. Yeah. For those of y'all wondering why we still have more pumpkins to shoot, well, maybe we'll shoot those in a future video with a different rifle. Stay tuned for that. All right, once again, we're taking a look at our old friend, Comrade Pumpkin. Something bad happened here. We really opened up that wound channel. Look at that. That is some massive carnage there. Oh yeah, and all the bugs are starting to encircle this, so I think we better get out of here. Man alive. All right, so what we've learned is you can actually hit pumpkins at relatively close range without a front sight. And my trick was just to aim really low. But it's hard to actually do that if you don't have a front sight, so how do you know if you're aiming really low? You just have to make sure you aim a lot lower than you normally would. It's the best way I can put that. All right, so let's actually take a closer look at our rifle now. All right, let's take a closer look at this abomination now that we've had a chance to shoot it and kind of get acquainted with it a little bit. So like I said, this is a St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. And for now, don't focus on the stock, just focus on the actual action in the rifle. If we take a closer look here at the markings, we can see Izhevsk, 1916. And then we have this really weird AA marking here. What is this gun? Well, this is where it gets weird. This is actually one of the strangest guns that I've ever come across. The St. Petersburg Cavalry Carbine, which is what it's kind of referred to here in America, is actually one of the most obscure military rifles in the entire world. And the main reason for that is because no one actually knows who made it, for what purpose it was made, or who used it even. So every time we take a look at this gun, it seems like we end up with more questions than we started with. And sometimes the answers that we thought we had turn out to maybe not even be answers at all. What do I mean by that? Well, originally this was in a cut down M91 stock. And if you've been watching some of our videos on this channel, you've probably seen that stock because we took a look at it earlier. It had this weird, so our stock is missing it, but it had this weird metal assembly right here that was kind of a sheath. The idea was you would have a folding bayonet at the end of the rifle, and it would fold and sit in that metal sheath. Now, it's commonly thought here in America that this rifle was made to use something called the Gulkovich bayonet, which is a really early type of folding bayonet. You may be familiar with the M44 folding bayonet. Well, that came around in World War II. This is much earlier than that. Now, I've seen some weird Russian forums and pictures that might actually contradict that. It almost seems like a Gulkovich bayonet doesn't quite fit on here. So, we don't really know. Kind of adds to the mystery of this rifle. Now, we can see here, we know from our shooting video that, yes, we are in fact missing our front sight. You'll also notice here that the barrel actually has a step in it. Why is that? Well, the step is actually to fit the bayonet, right? So the bayonet has to fit on this profile. But as you can see here, it's much thicker before the step. So they had to step it down to be a thinner profile so that it could match the inner diameter of the bayonet socket. And whenever you step a barrel down like this, the front sight you would have normally had is now lower, right? And that makes sense. So on this rifle, it had this really tall sight base, which is why I had to aim really low because the sight is actually like up here almost. It's crazy. Now, if we look at this guy, we can see that this has definitely been counterbored. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of the most worn examples of rifling I've ever seen in a firearm. Now, originally, from these markings, this rifle was most likely an M91 infantry rifle. So a very long rifle. That would have been the standard issue infantry rifle of World War I for the Russian army. And then at some point, somebody who we don't know who came along and decided to shorten it to step the barrel and replace the rear sight, as well as giving it a curved bolt handle. And this is one of the reasons we think this was a cavalry carbine. Okay, because you have this curved bolt here, and the idea is that maybe you have like a leather scabbard or something within, or on your horse, right? And you can just throw this in and it can slide over it. If you have a straight bolt, you're going to have a lot of problems trying to get that into a leather scabbard, right? Now, the interesting thing here is our serial number, which is 1781, is actually one off from the rifle, which is 1780. So that's pretty strange. And I guess maybe they just got one bolt off when they produced it. And the font's really strange on this, right? As we can see, the font is definitely not matching any type of Ijev's font that I've ever seen. This is ghetto font right here, is the best way I could put it. And we can see this is an old bolt handle. This is pre-1936, 1935-ish when they changed this. So this is one whole piece is just milled out. And we have a video on that too if you're interested in the different types of Mosin Nagant bolts. But that's what we'd expect on a really old Mosin like this. I mean, this rifle, as of this video, is 105 years old, and it works just fine. Okay. Now, these rifles were shortened from a lot of interesting rifles. So not only were they shortened from M91 rifles, but they were also shortened from Dragoon, and Cossack rifles. If you're interested more in looking at the original configuration of this gun, minus the bayonet, there's a good Forgotten Weapons video on it. In that video, Ian actually looks at one of these that's an antique Cossack. Now, a lot of those, the really nice original St. Petersburg cavalry carbines with all the original stock in good condition with the bracket assemblies and everything, will have actually German import markings here on the barrel shank. So that's the first type of St. Petersburg cavalry carbine you can find. The other type is one like we have here, where it has these really ghetto Century Arms import markings engraved on the side of the receiver back here. And on these is when we see these weird AA markings. This may be some type of unit marking, but nobody really knows what this is. The jury's still out on this. So we're still doing more research on this, but like I said, every time I try to find out more information on a gun like this, I end up with more questions than I did answers. And that's one of the things that makes it fascinating. It's fun to have just a fun gun like this that has a clandestine history that we just don't know about. But yet, we can still take it to the range and blow up some pumpkins. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is this rear sight. Okay? Now, we're about to take a look at another gun here that has the same rear sight. So let's do that now. Alright, so now we have two very strange looking Mosin Nagant carbine things. What do we have here? Alright, so here's our St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. But here is our 1907 carbine. And one of the things I've always heard is that the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine has the same rear sight as a 1907 carbine. But this is actually the first time that I've ever seen where we can have both of these rifles lined up side by side to take a closer look. But why is that? Well, you see, both of these rifles on their own are some of the most rare military rifles in the world. They're extremely hard to find. So don't mind the stocks here. This is a Halloween video, but focus on the actual guns and specifically the sights. Let's take a closer look at these sights. Now, a little bit of backstory on the 1907 carbine. We actually know a lot about these, but these were carbines produced even before World War I. This particular one was produced in 1909 by the Ijev's factory, and we don't exactly know how many of these were made. I've heard that over 300,000 of 1907 carbines were produced. However, I almost have a hard time believing that. I found one record that states in 1909 they produced just under 9,000 of these rifles. And I couple that with the fact that you simply can't find these rifles. They almost don't exist anymore. Now, what we do know is that troops did not like these rifles very much. I've heard a lot of complaints of inaccuracy that the troops had in World War I with these rifles. I don't know how much validity there is to that, so that's something we'll have to test in a future video. But one thing I can tell you, and you probably noticed this from shooting the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine, is that guy in broad daylight had a ton of muzzle flash. You could imagine what it's like shooting that at night. Well, if you want to give away your position to the enemy troops, get a St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. Or maybe you actually want one of these. You see, this 1907 carbine actually has a slightly shorter barrel than the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. And that's one of the reasons we know that 1907 carbines were not used to make these guns. These are cut down variations of other Mosin Nagant variants. But you can imagine the muzzle flash on this guy. I've heard that the troops just threw these away in favor of your standard M91 rifle or maybe another captured rifle. The Russians also had 1895 Winchesters, Type 30 Arisaka rifles, all sorts of other stuff. And I could see people in that respect favoring those over this for those reasons. However, when we start to get into things like trench combat, that's when actually both of these rifles come into play. Now, before I go off on too much more of a tangent, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the rear sights of these. Now, like I said, I've always heard that the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine has the same rear sight as a 1907 carbine. And what we can tell from looking at both of these rifles is that's half right. So if we look at our St. Petersburg, we can see our rear sight here graduated up to 20, which is 2,000 arshin, which would be like a pace, essentially. It's an old Russian form of measurement. And if we look at our 1907 carbine, what we can see is we have the same thing. Now notice this guy actually has the sight slider still, which is fantastic. The sight sliders are actually really hard to find. A lot of times they're missing on guns. So it's nice that we have that here to take a look at. The sight slider should also be present on our St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. Unfortunately, it's not, but that's okay. We can see there's like this little screw here to retain it, and that's present on the 1907 carbine as well. So what about these are different? Well, you might notice here, the first thing, the sight base and the back on the 1907 carbine is actually rounded. On the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine, it's actually flat here in the back. See that? There's our first difference. And the other difference is we look at the side profile, we can see typically there will be like steps for different ranges. There's really none. You just have this one step right here. And it's a right angle, 90-degree angle. On our St. Petersburg cavalry carbine, we can see that we actually have this weird step right here. So what we can infer from all of this is that the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine had the same sight, but a different sight base than a 1907 carbine. And again, this adds to the mystery of, well, was this done by, just like a really small workshop in Bulgaria? Or was this done by one of the Russian arsenals? We don't know. But it adds to the intrigue, for sure. I'm really just glad to get both of these rifles lined up side by side to show y'all, because again, it's really hard to find both of these rifles and to get them in the same room with each other. And the 1907 carbine, as I previously mentioned, is the closest gun in comparison to the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. So these are like really strange, distant second cousins, think of it that way. All right. Now, some of y'all may be wondering, does this gun have a name, the St. Petersburg cavalry carbine? If you're familiar with the channel, you know that we like to name our Mosins. We had one named Mick Jagger because someone decided to paint it black. So for today, our St. Petersburg cavalry carbine is now dubbed the Mosinator, which I think is a pretty fitting name for Halloween. So thank y'all for watching this video on the Mosinator, where we got to have a little bit of fun, right? Joke around a little bit, but also take a look at some really interesting history. And as I mentioned earlier, in regards to the whole concept of the mare's leg, we're actually going to test out this Obrez stock on this 1907 carbine. Because one of the interesting theories here is that Russian troops in the trenches, because the 1907 carbine is the shortest Mosin Nagant variant ever made, actually put it in an Obrez stock, but didn't cut down the barrel. Why would they do that? Well, it makes it really compact for trench warfare, right? You get rid of all of that, almost a whole foot. So it's easy to maneuver. And as we saw from the pumpkins, even if you don't have a front sight, you can still hit stuff at close range. So the idea is that maybe some troops in World War I had a separate Obrez stock aside, and whenever they wanted to do a trench raid, they would put the Obrez stock on a 1907 carbine, and they would run around with it. And then once they did the trench raid, they would put the standard 1907 carbine stock back on the rifle. And then you can use that to be a little more accurate, right, and engage targets out to several hundred meters. That's the idea. So that'll be an interesting video for another day. I really hope y'all enjoyed watching this, and I really appreciate y'all watching it. If you're interested in more weird Mosin Nagant content like this, please consider subscribing. It really helps out the channel. Let me know if y'all have any Mosin questions. Never hesitate to send me an email. I love getting emails and hearing from y'all. Please let me know if y'all have any prayer requests, and I'll see you next time.